Hello, and welcome to the Leadership Edge. I am your host, Ted Gorski. The Leadership Edge is a show that focuses on leadership topics and issues that you're dealing with on a daily basis. On the show, we talk about some of those issues and challenges, but also talk about ways that you can work through those as well as become a better leader. Now, today's show is going to be a series of shows, and what's been happening recently in my coaching sessions is I've been jumping into a lot of issues where people are having challenges with communication styles. So today's show is going to be starting with one of the styles that a lot of the leaders I've been working with have encountered and have had some challenges with. And today we're going to be talking about that dominant style. Yes, it's that dominant individual that you may be dealing with, communicating with, and trying to resolve issues with. And this might be a style that drives you absolutely crazy just because of how these people deal with issues. So today's show is going to really focus on these particular types of communication. It's this style. But more important, as a leader, what do you need to do to kind of work with them, influence this style, but also help get better results dealing with this style? But before we dive into everything about the style and talk about communicating and describing it, let's really just give some background information and talk about one of my favorite quotes from the late Stephen Covey, who wrote the book Habits of Highly Effective People, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of his quotes that really stuck with me is, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." And what's really interesting, as leaders, we really have to understand that there are different type of styles that you're going to be leading in your organization, in your teams, in your departments. And these styles see the world through a different lens. Your job is to understand what lens are you dealing with when you're leading these people, when you're trying to influence these people. Because if your lens is a little bit different in terms of how you see things, you may be encountering some challenges in how to communicate with these various styles. So our goal here in these series of shows is really give you an understanding of each of these styles, how they see the world, and what you can do to kind of impact those communications. But let's just first talk about just the basics of a communication process. Let's talk about the flow and what happens. As you can see from this little quick diagram that I have on the screen, it's really about the speaker and the listener. The speaker is the person who is approaching the listener, if you will, in providing their message, which is the cloud there in the middle of the screen. The speaker encodes a message. And when you think about encoding, think of it as this encoding is taking the message and wrapping it up and putting it in a box. And what the speaker does is wraps the present up the way they like to wrap it. Just like Christmas morning when they're wrapping their presents. The listener, on the other hand, is taking that present and that package, and what they're doing is decoding, and what they're doing is ripping it apart. They're ripping it apart the way they like to rip a present apart. Now, if you and I in this communication process are similar styles, most likely what you're going to encounter is the message is going to get through, the message will be seamless, and then the end result that you're looking for example, maybe for me, is when I deliver you the result, you probably look at it and go, yep, this is exactly what I'm looking for. But what happens if we're different? What happens in that flow of communication? Things kind of go awry, astray, or maybe communication just doesn't happen. Well, that's usually what happens when we're dealing with different styles. And what's important to understand is when you are encoding a message, there are 3 elements that we are using when we encode a message. And it's important for you to really understand when you're wrapping that present up and you're sending it over to somebody, how you do that. Well, there are 3 ways. One way is through body language. And the way we communicate it is posture, use of hands, facial expressions. So it may be how you're sitting, how you're standing. if you use your hands at all. Maybe they're very quiet, maybe you just kind of keep them still, although there's some styles that kind of use their hands quite a bit. And there's facial expressions. It's how you are showing those different emotions that are on your face. So one way is through your body language. The second way is through tone of voice. It's how fast or how slow you're going. So the pace and the inflection also has an impact on how you wrap your message. And lastly, it's the physical words you're using. So each of those elements make up how your communication style and your message gets through. So going back to our diagram, those three elements are ways that I wrap or encode my message. The listener who's receiving the message uses those same three elements: body language, tone of voice, and words. So you can see what happens that if we happen to be similar styles, the message gets through seamlessly. Because I'm not saying your body language is exact, I'm not saying your tone of voice is exact, but it's similar enough for the message to get through and for the message to be clearly understood. The challenge happens is when we're kind of different styles or different ways we see the world through a different prism. And when that happens, that's when body language gets misinterpreted. This is when tone of voice gets misinterpreted. And the words kind of get misinterpreted. So what's happening is when we're dealing with different styles, this is why messages go astray. Now, what's really interesting is when we take those three elements to a new level, going back to that slide, each of those elements make up three ways that 100% of how you create your message. So body language is 55% of how you communicate your message. Tone of voice is 38% of how you communicate your message, and words is 7%. So you can see what happens is through body language and tone, 93% of your message is through those two ways of communicating your message. This is why when there are different styles in play, because they have different interpretations of body language, tone, this is where misinterpretations happen. And as a leader, it's really important to understand how you frame those particular messages to the various styles. You know, I was working with a leader recently who wanted to work with me. And one of the things that she mentioned, the reasons why, is that her Monday morning status meetings were just terrible. What was happening is no one was communicating when she would have the status meeting, and it was almost like she was communicating the message. Well, what ended up happening is because I knew the various people in her team, I really knew what styles that were part of that team. When she came into our first coaching session, into the conference room, I immediately saw how she walked in, and I found and knew the problem. You see, her body language was pretty much screaming, "No one say anything." Her body language was screaming, "No one even go against what I have to say." And as a result, those styles sitting across the table from her would stay quiet. I had her practice 45 minutes, no kidding, 45 minutes straight in how to enter the room. I wanted that tone of that body language to be more inviting than in pushing people away. What's really interesting is the following week, her status meetings were better. They certainly weren't at the best place we want them to be, but it was a remarkable improvement. So you can see what kind of happens when that differences of body language, of tone of voice, can cause the different styles to get misinterpreted. I mean, when you were growing up, did your parents ever say to you, "Don't use that tone of voice on me," or "Don't look at me that way"? You see, they interpreted your body language and your tone of voice, if you use a certain tone of voice, as aggression. And what we're going to be doing over these series is really giving you a sense of how that kind of happens and why. So with that as a backdrop, let us talk about the dominant style today. Now, the dominant style person, that assertive, aggressive person, their focus is on two things. problems and challenges. This style enjoys solving problems. This style enjoys dealing with challenges and finding solutions to those challenges. So today's focus is going to be on that D or dominant style and how to deal with them. They look at two things that really separate this style. First, this style sees themselves as more powerful than the environment, meaning this style sees themselves as more powerful to change things, that they don't have to go up for debate. They feel like they have the ability all by themselves to make change and get results. They also see the environment that they work in as unfavorable, meaning they can see the good and bad of that particular style. They see the good and bad in the organization. So they can see what has to get fixed, what has to be dealt with. So just realize that this style sees the good and the bad and feels like they have the power to make the change to fix it. So looking at our model, we're going to be focusing on the top left-hand side of this model, the dominant style. And the dominant style is that fast-paced and task-oriented person. So we're going to be talking more about that style in today's show so you can get a clear understanding of how they operate and what's important to them. So here are some general characteristics of this style. We're not going to go through each and every one of these, but I want to give you kind of a highlighted view of kind of how this style sees the world. So in terms of the left-hand column, some of the descriptors of this style. This style is extremely competitive and direct. They are problem solvers and they are results-oriented people. This style only cares about what is the result we are going to achieve. This style is a self-starter. If you give this style something new, they will automatically jump into it and really dive into it to try to solve it. They don't need a lot of instructions. They just want to know what is the end game you're trying to achieve, and they'll figure it out. This style, value to the team, going into the second middle column, this style is a very challenge-oriented style. They will ask some penetrating questions. This style is about momentum to action. So they will initiate activity. Their job, they feel, is to rattle trees. And they will rattle trees and ask questions to get the project moving. So just realize that is kind of their makeup. They deal in an environment that's freedom from controls. They do not want to have controlled overview. They don't want to have controlled processes that's going to limit their ability to get results. So they just want to know what the end game is, and they'll figure it out. This style is not about routine work. If you give this style routine work, they will lose motivation. So they're always about challenge and finding new things to do. Going over to the third column, under stress, this style can get a lot more demanding, gets a lot more aggressive. When this style feels things aren't going well, you will see that they'll start to try to gain more control, and they tend to get more aggressive. So realize that they can get from 0 to 60 in terms of anger very, very quickly. This style, some limitations is they limit tact. If they don't like your idea, they will tell you. If they don't like your approach, they will tell you. So they won't hold anything back in regards to the people-oriented part of people. This is a style, if I had a 30-minute meeting with, at 30 minutes and 1 second, they are leaving the meeting. So just realize that this style is all about getting results, and they kind of don't have the great ability to be politically correct in terms of their tactfulness. Their emotion is anger. So just realize that they can get to anger very quickly. Now, to give you some examples of this style, we have Barbara Streisand, who is known as a D. She has the ability, she has an extremely controlling situation. She likes to control everything that goes on in her concerts and really has that ability to really get to the heart of things. We have Mark Cuban, who is on the show Shark Tank. He is brief and to the point, will ask some penetrating questions. So he's not this people-oriented type of person. He goes right to the bottom line task. So he's all about getting the task done and getting results. And you have Captain Kirk from the Starship Enterprise in terms of the entertainment world. This is a person that reconstructed a game that didn't have a good positive result, and he rigged it to get a winning result. So he is always about cutting corners to get the end result. So just some fun little things to kind of give you some understanding of this style and who kind of plays them so you can get a sense of that. So let's talk a little bit more about this style. Let's talk about some more descriptors of this style. As we mentioned, very direct and blunt. This style is extremely decisive. They decide by themselves. They get information and they will run with it. Remember, this style only needs 51% of the information to move forward. So just realize that this style is about decisions and moving forward. Very competitive, very results oriented. This style has a large and strong ego. They feel very proud about themselves and what they achieved. But they're also very demanding. Demanding in terms of getting results, demanding in terms of actions, and demanding in regards to some of the questions they may ask. So this just gives you some overview. Now, with them in meetings and how they come across in meetings, this style will control a meeting. This style will also speak up. This style that will not stand in a corner and be quiet. They will speak up and give their point of view, but they also will challenge others in regards to their point of view. They will make decisions, and again, as I said earlier, by themselves. This is a style that wants the big picture. They provide the big picture. They help provide the vision. So they're always looking at kind of where do we want to go? Where are we trying to achieve in terms of understanding what we want to do? Here's another interesting point about the dominant style. They need an agenda and want an agenda. They want to bulletize the agenda to know where the meeting is flowing. So when they get an agenda, this style looks at it just to kind of get a sense of how the meeting will flow. The last thing a dominant wants to do is to walk in a meeting not knowing how the meeting will flow. So if you're not this style, the one way to start getting brownie points with this style is to provide an agenda for any meeting that they're going to be part of. But let's talk about some of their blind spots, because the dominant style doesn't necessarily understand how they may be coming across to others. They may not understand how they're impacting others. Very important parts here is that they have trust issues, especially with people who burnt them before. So realize that if you're a person that works with this style, they kind of judge you based on that. They're not very great listeners. They kind of will hear what they want to hear, and as a result, they move in a certain direction. Just realize that they're not the most in-depth listeners. Now, this style may miss details because all they feel they need is 51% of an issue to start moving forward to making a decision. So just realize you don't have to inundate this style with details. If they want more information, they will ask you for that information. So don't realize you have to give them all a plethora of information. And lastly, this style is very judgmental. What they tend to do will assess the situation and place their judgments on it. I once worked with a D who at 5 o'clock would come in my office and say, look at these people clearing out at 5. They have no commitment. And I had to explain to this D that, in fact, my team did have commitment, and the fact that they were on call all the time meant that they were dealing with issues after hours. So just realize that they come to the table sometimes with some judgments. And it's important for you, if you're not a D, to address those judgments, because if you don't, then they become reality for the dominant style. But the one thing that's important to understand for the dominant style is they do have some value. They do bring some value to the team. As we mentioned earlier, they're a self-starter. They will take on new challenges. They will initiate activity. They're a momentum to action. And this style is all about results, and they want to win. So this style will do anything they can to be successful, but the whole bottom line of this style is results. It's about getting the bottom line results. And remember, the results may mean more money, results may mean higher productivity, but results also may mean reducing costs. So just realize when you're working with this style that results can be in many different ways. It just doesn't have to be money. But how do you recognize this style? How do you know you're working with this style? Some key things for you to keep an eye out on. First, this style has a very strong handshake. Not crushing, but a very confident handshake. So you can imagine if you're shaking hands with this style and you have that soft handshake that denotes sometimes lack of confidence, this style can feel it, and in their mind they feel like they can crush you. So just realize a strong, firm handshake really is important when you're dealing with this style. They will have a confident tone of voice. They will not be meek in their voice. They will have direct eye contact. When they're speaking with you, they'll look right at you. So it's important for you to look right back at them. This style's constantly in a hurry. They're constantly moving from meeting to meeting, from phone call to phone call, because this style usually has a lot on their plate. This style has little chit-chat. They're not going to talk to you about the weekend and how was your vacation. They are basically very task-focused and just care about the result and what they're working on. They're extremely status conscious. They are looking at, if they're bringing people in, they want to know what that person has achieved because they only want to work with winners and who are going to support their goals. This style also is very direct in their communication. They're going to tell you, they're going to ask you a question directly, and they're going to want to know what the end result's going to be. So there is no indirect communication with this style. They're asking specific questions for a specific reason. So how do you influence this style? What do you do? Well, if you're not this style, you need to come to the table with results. So again, results can be higher productivity. Could be higher revenue. When you're working on a project, maybe it's increased efficiencies. But the key thing is you have to come with some type of results-oriented mindset when you're having a conversation with this style. I'm working with a coach right now who has his particular manager is a high dominant style. And I am speaking to the person I'm coaching to really get them in the mindset of really thinking results whenever they're talking to their boss. So you really have to come to the table with that. Secondly, you have to provide options. When you're working with this style, ask them, here are two ways that I can see we can solve this problem, and provide those two options. Because to the dominant style, what they're doing is they're processing your options and your ideas, and they'll pick one. They do not want you to come to them and say, we have a problem, but not provide any solution. So it's important for you to provide at least two options to solve the problem. And from their perspective, they're the one that's going to make the decision based on that. Now, the great thing about providing options is that you are going to provide the options. And let me say this, do you really care what style or which option they choose? Of course not. You've created the options. So just realize that providing options, this style really, really appreciates that. Third thing is you want to avoid rhetorical questions. Things like if it's a real hot day, don't walk into this style's office and say, hot day, isn't it? This style will just really roll their eyes. So anything that's obvious, you don't want to provide some type of rhetorical question. You want to be very direct in your approach here. And their motto is be brief, be bright, and be gone. So don't give them a long story. They just want to know what has to get done. And lastly, use a logical approach. Go from step A to step B to step C. Don't jump around in your arguments. Don't jump around in terms of what you're trying to achieve. Get right to the point and be very logical in what you're doing. So, your action plan this week. We talked about this dominant style. If this is not your style, the key thing I want you to realize is I want you to try some of these things that we talked about today. Remember, this style goes at 100 miles an hour. They're thinking, they're processing quickly. If this is not your style, guess what? You're going to need to go and think very quickly with this style. You're going to have to create the pace that's going to connect with this style. Provide them options. Give them different options so they can choose from. But more importantly, be brief in your comments. And the last thing I'll recommend is make sure you provide an agenda with any meeting you have with this style. You'll find out that you're going to get great results. So this week, find a dominant style and try some of these tips and techniques to see how they work for you. So if there's anything that we can do to help you with your leadership needs, please reach out to us at www.getYourEdge.com. You're going to be very happy to kind of help you with any of your leadership needs. So again, my name is Ted Gorski. Thank you for tuning in to today's show on the Leadership Edge, and see you next time on the Leadership Edge.